There's a lot that's going on around the world. There's a lot happening in our societies. There are many things that are capturing our attention, our imagination on social media, on news cycles that we are engaging with, and they can tend to be quite overwhelming and quite confusing as you're sitting there as an individual. At Cohesion Collective, we've come up with a model that has really enabled us to cut through the noise, to better understand all of these complexities and all of these discussions that are happening in our public spaces in a way that can be quite granular and quite clear regarding how it is that we understand and position ourselves. And we call this model the layered cake. At the top of the layered cake, we have what we call the factual matrix. And I'd love for you to think for a moment regarding what are the hot topics that are capturing the discussions, the debates around your different countries and jurisdictions. Whether you're speaking about immigration, climate change, politics, elections within spaces. These are the things that capture a lot of our public discourse and public discussions as we engage with each other. But below the factual matrix is what we call the emotional matrix, and that's where many people refuse to go. That whenever we're discussing these things within the factual, whenever we ask people what do they believe and think are the two most dominant emotions that are at play, whenever they're discussing their politics, they're discussing immigration, Brexit, climate change that's happening in their spaces, they'll very quickly tell you that when they really think about it, at the core of what it is that drives the emotion behind these discussions are the emotions of fear and anger. It is the fear and anger that drives these discussions. It is this fear and anger that drives how it is that we're engaging with each other. But very few of us actually are able to admit to ourselves that at the core of what it is that we're trying to engage with and understand are these two core dominant emotions of fear and anger. Right? But these emotions are not random. They're really not arbitrary. They're rooted within a particular historical context, which informs these emotions that we feel whenever we're engaging with the matters and the different concepts within the factual matrix. And let's take Black Lives Matter as an example. Started off in the United States, and we've seen it move like wildfire across the world. Even here in South Africa, we've really been able to resonate with this statement, with this movement that says that Black Lives Matter. Within our public discourse, when you look at the emotions, there have been huge emotions of fear and anger, and people are looking at the looting, and we get distracted by that sideshow without really coming into the realization and to focus even further. Why is it that we've seen Black Lives Matter play out in the way in which it has? And this brings us to the point that is quite important in understanding our historical matrix. If we understand the historical context in the United States, that Black Americans were reduced to the level of animals, cattle, for more than 350 years, seen as property, denied education, denied starting businesses or even building their families. If we do not know and understand that history, that even until the early 1900s, they were constitutionally classified in their constitution as 3/5 of a human being. If we do not know that history, we will find confusing, we will find controversial a statement that says that we must acknowledge and recognize that Black Lives Matter. If we do not know the history of Australia, that the Aboriginal people of Australia were classified as flora and fauna until 1948, and only recognized fully in their parliament in 1949 as humans, if we do not know that history, we will find controversial a statement that says Black Lives Matter. If we refuse to learn and understand and acknowledge the history that in Belgium they had human zoos until 1958, where African children were bought in order to be displayed for paying patrons to come and view them. If we do not know that history, we will find controversial a statement that says Black Lives Matter. If we refuse to acknowledge and learn that history, that I myself in my own country was only fully considered a citizen in 1994, we are talking yesterday, this is not ancient history. But if we don't know this history, we will find controversial, we will find confusing a statement that says Black Lives Matter. And so this is why it's so important, and in understanding this layered cake, that whenever we're engaging with the matters and the topics and the factual, we will not get any resolution, and we'll always be confused about the emotions and how it is that people really respond to these very tough topics if we refuse to acknowledge and look at in very sober ways what's the historical context that informs that which is controversial that we're trying to resolve within our societies. At the core of what we're talking about here is about racial justice. But before we can achieve racial justice, we need to look back and acknowledge that we come from a history of racial injustice. More importantly, just because I do not see that injustice myself personally, does not mean that racial injustice does not exist. And this is why it's so important that we engage in these discussions, no matter how uncomfortable they may be.